I never thought the day would come when my own daughter would look me in the eyes and call me useless. The word hit me harder than any slap, echoing in the quiet of my kitchen, shattering the fragile peace I'd spent a lifetime building. I stood there, clutching the edge of the counter, my heart pounding as she turned away, her voice still ringing in my ears. "You're useless, Mom. You're just in the way." I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but all I could do was watch as she walked out, leaving me alone with the bitter taste of betrayal. That night, I sat in the dark, replaying her words over and over, wondering how we had come to this. I had given her everything, my time, my love, my sacrifices, my dreams. I had poured my soul into raising her, believing that one day she would understand the depth of a mother's love. But now, all I saw in her eyes was cold calculation, a hunger for more than I could ever give. What she didn't know was that her cruelty had awakened something inside me. I was done being invisible, done being taken for granted. If she thought I was useless, then maybe it was time to show her just how wrong she was. Maybe it was time to give my fortune to someone who would truly value it. A stranger, perhaps, who could teach us both what real gratitude looks like. You think you know what betrayal feels like? Wait until you hear what happened when I decided to give everything away. This is the story of how one word changed my life, and how I found the strength to rewrite my own ending. My name is Evelyn Carter, and for most of my life, I believed that being a mother was my greatest calling. I grew up in a small town, the kind where everyone knows your name and your business, and I learned early on that love was measured in actions, not words. My own mother worked herself to the bone to keep food on the table, and I promised myself that when I had a family, I would give them everything I never had: security, comfort, and above all, unconditional love. When my daughter Lauren was born, I felt as if the world had given me a second chance. She was a bright, curious child, always asking questions, always wanting to help. I remember the way she used to curl up in my lap after a long day, her small arms wrapped around my neck, whispering, "I love you, Mommy." Those were the moments I lived for, the memories I clung to when the world felt too heavy. I worked hard, sometimes 2 jobs at once, to make sure Lauren never went without. I packed her lunches with little notes, cheered the loudest at her school plays, and stayed up late helping her with homework, even when my eyes burned with exhaustion. I put off my own dreams, telling myself there would be time for me later. My happiness was tied to hers, and I wore my sacrifices like a badge of honor. As Lauren grew older, things began to change. The sweet little girl who once begged for bedtime stories became a teenager who rolled her eyes at my advice. She started spending more time with friends, coming home late, and brushing off my questions with a dismissive wave. I told myself it was just a phase, that all mothers and daughters go through rough patches. But the distance between us grew, and I found myself longing for the days when a hug could fix everything. After her father passed away, Lauren and I were all we had left. I thought our shared grief would bring us closer, but instead, it seemed to harden something inside her. She became more demanding, more impatient, as if the world owed her for the pain she'd endured. I tried to fill the void with gifts, new clothes, a car for her 16th birthday, money for college, but nothing ever seemed to be enough. The more I gave, the more she expected. Our daily life settled into a routine that felt both familiar and strained. I would wake up early to make breakfast, only to find Lauren already gone, a half-eaten piece of toast left on the counter. She rarely called, except when she needed something, a bill paid, a favor done, a problem solved. When she did come home, she barely glanced in my direction, her eyes glued to her phone, her words clipped and impatient. There were moments, small and fleeting, when I caught a glimpse of the daughter I once knew, a soft smile, a quiet thank you, a gentle touch on my shoulder. But those moments were rare, overshadowed by the growing sense of entitlement that seemed to color everything she did. She spoke of my house as if it were already hers, made plans for my savings, and joked about how she would take care of me when I was old, her tone half mocking, half threatening. I tried to ignore the warning signs, to convince myself that she was just struggling to find her way, But deep down, I knew something had shifted. The love I had poured into her for so many years now felt like a debt she resented, a burden she was eager to cast off. I found myself walking on eggshells, afraid to say the wrong thing, desperate to hold on to whatever scraps of affection she was willing to give. Looking back, I can see the cracks that had begun to form long before that terrible day in the kitchen. I can see how my sacrifices, once a source of pride, had become invisible to the one person I had made them for. I can see how the lines between love and obligation, between giving and enabling, had blurred until I no longer recognized myself in the mirror. But at the time, all I saw was my daughter, the center of my world, the reason I got up every morning, the hope I clung to when everything else fell apart. I never imagined that the child I loved so fiercely would one day become the source of my deepest pain. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that should have been filled with warmth and laughter. I had invited Lauren over for lunch, hoping to bridge the growing distance between us. I spent the morning preparing her favorite meal, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and the apple pie she used to beg for as a child. I set the table with the good china, lit a candle, and even put on the necklace she'd given me years ago, back when gifts still meant something. Lauren arrived late. Breezing in with barely a hello, her phone pressed to her ear as she paced the hallway. She barely glanced at the food, muttering something about being on a diet, and scrolled through her messages while I tried to make conversation. I asked about her job, her friends, her plans for the week, but every answer was short, distracted, as if she couldn't be bothered to look up from her screen. Halfway through the meal, she suddenly put her phone down and fixed me with a look I hadn't seen before, cold, impatient, almost angry. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the quiet. "I can't keep living like this. I need help, real help. I want you to sign the house over to me. And I need money for a new car. I deserve it after everything I've put up with." The words hung in the air, heavy and unreal. I stared at her, searching her face for some sign that she was joking, that this was just another one of her dramatic outbursts. But there was no warmth in her eyes, no trace of the little girl who used to run to me for comfort. There was only calculation, a sense of entitlement that made my heart ache. I tried to reason with her, to remind her of all I had done, all I had given. "Lauren, this is our home. Your father and I built this life together. I want you to have everything one day, but..." She cut me off with a wave of her hand. "One day? I need it now, Mom. You're just sitting here doing nothing. You're useless. Why shouldn't I have what's mine?" The word hit me like a slap. Useless. I felt the blood drain from my face, my hands trembling as I tried to steady myself. I looked around the room at the photos on the wall, the memories we had built together, and wondered how it had come to this. How had the daughter I loved so fiercely become a stranger capable of such cruelty? Lauren didn't stop there. She launched into a tirade, listing every perceived slight, every time she felt I hadn't done enough, every sacrifice I had made, twisted into a weapon. She accused me of holding her back, of being selfish, of caring more about the house than about her happiness. She even mocked the meal I had prepared, pushing her plate away with a sneer. I felt the eyes of the world on me, even though we were alone. I imagined the neighbors hearing her raised voice, the judgment in their whispers, the pity in their glances. I wanted to disappear, to shrink into the floor and escape the humiliation that burned in my chest. When she finally stormed out, slamming the door behind her, I sat in stunned silence, the echo of her words ringing in my ears. Useless, the word replayed in my mind, over and over until it became a drumbeat of pain. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to hold back the tears, but they came anyway. Hot, bitter, unstoppable. I had never felt so alone, so betrayed, so utterly lost. The daughter I had given everything to had reduced me to nothing with a single word. I wondered if I had failed her, if I had failed myself, if all the years of sacrifice and love had been for nothing. The heartbreak was overwhelming, a tidal wave that threatened to pull me under. In that moment, something inside me broke. The world I thought I knew crumbled, and I was left with nothing but the sharp, cold truth. The person I loved most in the world saw me as useless, as an obstacle, as someone to be discarded. And for the first time, I began to wonder if she was right. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself that Lauren's outburst was just a moment of stress, a symptom of the pressures she faced in her own life. I told myself that she didn't mean it, that she would call and apologize, that we would find our way back to each other. But as the silence stretched on, my hope began to wither, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease I couldn't shake. I started to notice things I'd ignored before. Lauren's visits became less frequent, but when she did come by, she was always in a hurry, her eyes darting around the house as if she were taking inventory. She asked pointed questions about my finances, how much was left in my savings, whether I'd updated my will, if I'd thought about downsizing. She lingered in my study, flipping through papers on my desk, and once I caught her rifling through the drawer where I kept important documents. When I asked what she was looking for, she brushed me off with a tight smile. "Just making sure you're organized, Mom. You know how forgetful you can be." Her words stung, but it was the way she said them, so casual, so dismissive, that made my skin crawl. I began to wonder if I was imagining things, if the grief and loneliness were making me paranoid. But then, I started to overhear snippets of conversation when she thought I wasn't listening. One afternoon, as I passed by the living room, I heard her on the phone, her voice low and urgent. "She's getting older, and honestly, she doesn't need all that space. If I can get her to sign the papers, we could list the house by next month. No, she won't fight me. She never does." My heart pounded in my chest as I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear more. The conversation ended abruptly when she noticed me, her expression shifting instantly from annoyance to forced concern. "Are you okay, Mom? You look tired. Maybe you should rest." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction, every offhand comment, every time she had dismissed my feelings or needs. I thought about the way she had started bringing her friends around, giving them tours of the house, pointing out which rooms she would remodel and which furniture she would get rid of. I remembered the way she had laughed when I mentioned wanting to plant a new rose bush in the garden, telling me not to bother since it'll all be different soon anyway. The more I tried to ignore the signs, the more they multiplied. I found a stack of real estate brochures in her car, all marked with notes in her handwriting. I discovered a folder tucked away in her purse, filled with printouts about power of attorney, inheritance laws, and how to convince an elderly parent to move. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages, the reality of her intentions settling over me like a cold fog. One afternoon, I overheard her talking to a friend in the kitchen. "She's so stubborn, but I'll wear her down. Once I have the house, I can finally get out of this dump and start living my life. She owes me that much after everything I've put up with." The words cut deeper than any insult, each syllable a fresh wound. I wanted to confront her, to demand an explanation, but fear held me back. What if I was wrong? What if I pushed her away for good? I started to question my own judgment, to wonder if I was being unfair, if I was reading too much into her actions. But every time I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, she did something to shatter my fragile trust. She began insisting on handling my bills, offering to help with my banking, and even suggested I add her name to my accounts just in case something happened. When I hesitated, she accused me of being ungrateful, of not trusting her, of making things harder than they needed to be. The tension between us grew, a silent battle waged in glances and half-finished sentences. I found myself watching her more closely, searching for signs of the daughter I once knew, the child who had clung to my hand in crowded stores and whispered secrets in the dark. But all I saw was a stranger, someone who saw me not as a mother, but as an obstacle standing in the way of her own happiness. I tried to reach out, to bridge the gap between us, but every attempt was met with resistance. She brushed off my invitations, ignored my calls, and when she did respond, her words were laced with impatience and barely concealed contempt. I felt myself shrinking, my world growing smaller with each passing day, as if I were slowly being erased from my own life. The final blow came when I found a letter from a lawyer tucked into her bag, outlining the steps to declare a parent mentally unfit and gain full control of their assets. My hands trembled as I read the words, the truth settling over me like a shroud. Lauren wasn't just impatient or entitled. She was plotting to take everything I had, to strip me of my independence, my dignity, my very identity. The realization was both devastating and clarifying. For the first time, I saw her actions for what they were, not the misguided flailing of a lost child, but the calculated moves of someone who saw me as a means to an end. The trust I had clung to for so long was gone, replaced by a cold, hard suspicion that left me feeling both foolish and furious. I knew then that I had to protect myself, to find a way to hold on to what little I had left. But more than that, I knew I had to face the truth. The daughter I had loved and sacrificed for was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. And as the walls closed in around me, I realized that the only person I could truly rely on was myself. There are moments when the past comes rushing back so vividly that it feels like I'm living it all over again. In the quiet of my bedroom, with the world outside hushed and still, I find myself drifting through memories, some sweet, some bitter, all tangled together in the tapestry of my life as a mother. I close my eyes and I'm back in the old kitchen, flour dusting my hands as Lauren, no more than 5, stands on a stool beside me, giggling as she shapes cookie dough into crooked hearts. Her laughter was music then, a melody that filled the house with warmth and hope. I remember the way she'd run to me after a nightmare, her small arms wrapping around my waist, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Don't let go, Mommy." I never did. Not once. I think of the nights I stayed up late, sewing costumes for her school plays, my fingers aching but my heart full. The mornings I woke before dawn to make her favorite pancakes, just to see her smile before she rushed off to catch the bus. The years I worked double shifts, missing birthdays and holidays so she could have new shoes, a better school, a chance at the life I never had. I remember the pride in her eyes when she brought home a good grade, the way she'd curl up beside me on the couch, her head on my shoulder as we watched old movies together. Those were the moments I lived for, the memories I clung to when everything else felt uncertain. But now, those memories feel like someone else's life. The laughter has faded, replaced by silence and suspicion. The hugs are gone, replaced by cold glances and clipped words. I wonder where I went wrong, what I missed, what I could have done differently. Was I too soft, too giving? Did I make it too easy for her to take me for granted? Or was I simply not enough no matter how hard I tried? I replay the last few years in my mind, searching for the moment when everything changed. Was it after her father died, when grief settled over our home like a heavy fog? Was it when she left for college and the distance between us grew wider with every phone call that went unanswered? Or was it always there, a seed of resentment that I never saw until it blossomed into something poisonous? Sometimes, late at night, I walk through the house and run my fingers over the photographs lining the hallway. Lauren's first steps, her graduation, the two of us laughing in the sun. I wonder if she ever looks at these pictures and remembers the love that built this home, the sacrifices that filled it with light. Or does she only see what she wants now? The house, the money, the things she believes she's owed? The pain of realizing her true nature is sharper than any physical wound. It's a hollow ache in my chest, a tightness in my throat, a heaviness that settles over me like a shroud. I feel foolish for trusting so blindly, for loving so fiercely, for believing that family was unbreakable. I wonder if I was ever truly loved, or if I was always just a means to an end, a caretaker, a provider, a stepping stone to something better. I think about the times I tried to set boundaries, to say no, to ask for respect. Each time, I was met with anger, manipulation, or icy silence. I learned to apologize for things that weren't my fault, to shrink myself so she could shine. I told myself it was just a phase, that she would come back to me when she was older, wiser, more grateful. But as the years passed, the distance only grew, and I found myself mourning the loss of a daughter who was still very much alive. There are flashes of tenderness, moments that remind me of what we once had. I remember the feel of her hand in mine as we crossed the street, the sound of her laughter echoing through the house, the sight of her asleep on the couch, a book clutched to her chest. I hold on to those memories, even as they cut me to the bone. I question my worth, my role as a mother. Was I too much or not enough? Did I give her too much freedom or not enough guidance? Did I love her so much that I forgot to love myself? The questions swirl in my mind, unanswered and unanswerable, yet, beneath the pain, there is a flicker of something else, a stubborn spark that refuses to die. I remember who I was before I became a mother, the dreams I had, the strength I carried. I remember the woman who built a life from nothing, who survived heartbreak and loss, who found joy in the smallest things. I remind myself that I am more than the sum of my sacrifices, more than the disappointments and betrayals. As I sit in the quiet, surrounded by the ghosts of my past, I make a silent promise to myself. I will not let her cruelty define me. I will not let her greed destroy the love I have for myself. I will find a way to rise from these ashes, to reclaim my dignity, to write a new story for myself. And when the time comes, I will make sure she knows exactly what she lost. The days blurred into weeks, and with each passing one, Lauren's behavior grew more brazen, her demands more insistent. It was as if my heartbreak had only emboldened her, as if my silence was a green light for her to push further, to see just how much I would endure before I broke. I found myself shrinking in my own home, tiptoeing around her moods, afraid to set her off, afraid to lose what little connection we had left. It started with the paperwork. One evening, she arrived unannounced, her arms full of folders and her face set in a mask of determination. "We need to get your affairs in order, Mom," she said, her tone clipped and businesslike. "It's for your own good. You're not getting any younger, and I can't keep worrying about what will happen if something goes wrong." She spread the documents across the kitchen table. Power of attorney forms, property transfer agreements, bank authorizations. "Just sign here," she said, tapping the page with a manicured finger. "It'll make things easier for both of us." I stared at the papers, my hands trembling. The words swam before my eyes, legal jargon and fine print blurring together. I tried to protest, to ask for time to think, but Lauren's patience was thin. "Why are you making this so difficult?" she snapped. "Don't you trust me? Or do you just want to make my life harder?" Her voice rose, sharp and accusing, and I felt the old guilt rise up in me, the urge to apologize, to smooth things over, to keep the peace at any cost. But something inside me resisted. I told her I needed to review the documents, to consult with someone before signing. Her eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Fine," she said, gathering the papers with a huff. "But don't blame me if things get complicated later. I'm only trying to help." After that, the atmosphere in the house grew colder. Lauren stopped pretending to care about my feelings. She came and went as she pleased, sometimes ignoring me for days, other times showing up with a list of demands. She began to criticize everything I did, my cooking, my clothes, the way I kept the house. "You're slipping, Mom," she'd say, shaking her head. "Maybe it's time you thought about moving somewhere with more support." The implication was clear. She wanted me out of the house, out of her way. She started leaving brochures for assisted living facilities on the kitchen counter, circling prices and amenities in red ink. "You'd be happier there," she insisted. "You'd have people your own age to talk to. You wouldn't have to worry about anything." But I knew the truth. She wanted the house, the money, the freedom to live her life without the burden of an aging mother. The humiliation didn't stop at home. One afternoon, she invited a few of her friends over for coffee. I tried to stay out of the way, but I could hear them laughing in the living room, their voices carrying through the thin walls. "She's so stubborn," Lauren complained, loud enough for me to hear. "She refuses to let go, even though she can barely keep up anymore. I swear, sometimes I think she forgets where she is." The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel, and I felt my cheeks burn with shame. Later, when I confronted her, Lauren shrugged. "Don't be so sensitive, Mom. We were just joking. You need to learn to laugh at yourself." But there was no kindness in her eyes, no trace of the daughter I once knew. Only impatience, only calculation. The isolation grew. Old friends stopped calling, unsure of what to say or how to help. Neighbors offered sympathetic smiles, but kept their distance, unwilling to get involved in family matters. I found myself spending more and more time alone, wandering the empty rooms of my house, haunted by memories of happier days. I tried to reach out to Lauren, to remind her of the bond we once shared, but every attempt was met with coldness or contempt. One evening, As I sat alone in the living room, I heard her on the phone again, her voice low and urgent. "She's being difficult, but I'll get her to sign. If I have to, I'll tell her she's losing her mind. The doctor already said she's forgetful. It won't be hard to convince them." My heart pounded in my chest, fear and anger warring inside me. Was she really planning to have me declared incompetent? Was she willing to go that far for money? I began to question everything: my memory, my sanity, my worth. I started keeping a journal, writing down every conversation, every strange occurrence, every time Lauren tried to manipulate or gaslight me. I hid important documents, changed passwords, and quietly reached out to an old friend who worked at a legal aid clinic. I didn't know what I was looking for: advice, protection, maybe just someone to believe me, but I knew I couldn't face this alone. The humiliation reached its peak at a family gathering. Lauren stood in front of our relatives, recounting stories of my supposed forgetfulness, my eccentric behavior, my inability to manage the house. "I'm just trying to do what's best for her," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "But she refuses to accept help. It's exhausting." I felt the eyes of my family on me, some filled with pity, others with suspicion. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, but the words caught in my throat. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of my daughter's betrayal pressing down on me. I thought about all the years I had spent putting her first, all the dreams I had set aside, all the love I had poured into her. Was this my reward? To be cast aside, humiliated, treated like a burden? I knew I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't let her strip me of my dignity, my independence, my sense of self. I began to contemplate my options, to imagine a life beyond Lauren's shadow. Maybe it was time to take back control, to make a decision that would shock her, that would remind her, and myself, that I was not as powerless as she believed. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope, a sense of agency. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not let my daughter define my worth. I would not let her greed and cruelty be the final chapter of my story. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when I met her, the stranger who would change the course of my life. I had ventured out to the local library, seeking refuge from the suffocating silence of my house. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the air smelled of wet earth and old paper. I wandered the aisles, running my fingers along the spines of books I'd read 100 times before, trying to remember who I was before my world had shrunk to the size of my daughter's demands. I was reaching for a novel on the top shelf when it slipped from my grasp and tumbled to the floor. Before I could bend down, a gentle hand reached out and picked it up. "Here you go," a warm voice said. I looked up to see a woman about my age, her eyes kind and her smile genuine. She wore a simple blue cardigan and carried a canvas tote bag filled with books. "Thank you," I murmured, feeling suddenly self-conscious. She introduced herself as Grace. We struck up a conversation, first about books, then about the weather, and soon about life. There was an ease to her presence, a quiet strength that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. She listened without interrupting, her eyes never straying to a phone or a clock. When I mentioned my daughter, my voice faltering, she didn't press for details. Instead, she offered a gentle, "It sounds like you've carried a lot on your own." We sat together in the library's small cafe, sipping tea as the rain tapped against the windows. Grace told me about her own journey, how she'd lost her husband young, how she'd built a life from scratch, how she'd learned to find joy in small things. She spoke of kindness, of resilience, of the importance of choosing your own family when the one you're born into lets you down. Her words settled over me like a balm, soothing wounds I hadn't realized were still open. For the first time in a long while, I felt safe enough to share my story. I told her about Lauren, about the love, the sacrifices, the slow unraveling of our bond. I spoke of the humiliation, the isolation, the fear that I was losing myself. Grace listened, her expression never turning to pity, only understanding. "You deserve better," she said softly. "You deserve to be valued for who you are, not just for what you can give." Her words echoed in my mind long after we parted ways. That night I lay awake replaying our conversation. I thought about the contrast between Grace's gentle empathy and Lauren's cold calculation. I thought about the way Grace had looked at me, not as a burden, but as a person with a story worth hearing. I realized how starved I was for that kind of respect, how long it had been since anyone had seen me as more than a means to an end. The next day, Grace called to invite me to a community gathering at the local center. "No pressure," she said, "but I think you'd enjoy it. There are people there who understand what it's like to start over." I hesitated, but something in her voice made me say yes. At the gathering, I met women who had faced their own storms, widows, divorcees, mothers estranged from their children. Their stories were different, but the ache in their eyes was the same. Yet there was laughter too, and hope, and a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. As the days passed, Grace and I grew closer. She checked in on me, brought me homemade soup, invited me for walks in the park. She never asked for anything in return. Her kindness was simple, unadorned, and utterly sincere. I found myself opening up, rediscovering parts of myself I thought I'd lost. I began to imagine a life where I was valued, not for my assets, but for my heart. One evening, after a particularly difficult call with Lauren, her voice sharp, her demands relentless, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the stack of legal documents she'd left behind. My hands shook as I realized I was no longer afraid. I was angry, yes, and hurt, but beneath it all was a new clarity. I didn't owe Lauren my life, my home, or my dignity. I didn't have to reward her cruelty with my legacy. I thought of Grace, of the way she had shown me respect without expectation, of the way she had reminded me of my own worth. I thought of the women at the community center, of the strength it took to start over, and I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I made an appointment with my lawyer. I sat across from him, my voice steady as I explained my decision. "I want to change my will," I said. "I want to leave everything to someone who has shown me kindness when I needed it most. Someone who values me for who I am, not what I have." The lawyer raised an eyebrow, but he didn't question me. He simply nodded and began the paperwork. As I signed the new documents, a sense of peace washed over me. For the first time in years, I felt in control of my own story. I wasn't acting out of spite or revenge. I was choosing to honor myself, to give my fortune to someone who understood the true meaning of gratitude and compassion. I knew Lauren would be furious, that there would be consequences. But I also knew that I was done letting her define my worth. I was done being invisible. I was ready to step into the light, to claim the life I deserved, and to leave a legacy of kindness rather than bitterness. And as I walked out of the lawyer's office, the sun breaking through the clouds, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It didn't take long for Lauren to find out. I suppose I should have expected it. She'd always had a way of sniffing out anything that threatened her plans. The call came late one evening, her number flashing on my phone just as I was settling in with a cup of tea. I hesitated before answering, my heart already pounding, but I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. The moment I picked up, her voice exploded through the line, sharp and venomous. "What have you done, Mom? Don't play dumb. I know you changed your will. I know you left everything to some stranger. Are you out of your mind?" Her words came in a torrent, each one laced with disbelief and fury. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? You're pathetic. You're spiteful. You're ruining my life." I tried to speak, to explain, but she wouldn't let me. "You think you're teaching me a lesson? You think you're so clever? Well, congratulations. You've just made sure I'll never forgive you. I hope you're happy with your new best friend. Because you don't have a daughter anymore." The line went dead, leaving me in a silence so deep it felt like the world had stopped spinning. I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, my hands trembling. The grief hit me in waves, first shock, then sorrow, then a hollow ache that settled in my chest. I had known this would hurt, but I hadn't expected the pain to be so sharp, so final. The little girl I had loved, the woman I had tried so hard to save, was gone. In her place was someone I barely recognized, someone who saw my love as a weapon, my boundaries as betrayal. Tears slipped down my cheeks as I thought of all the years I had spent trying to protect her, to give her everything she needed. Had I failed her? Had I failed myself? Was I really as useless and spiteful as she claimed? The questions circled in my mind, each one heavier than the last. I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake, if I had let my anger and hurt drive me to an act I would regret for the rest of my life. But beneath the grief, there was something else, a quiet, stubborn relief. For the first time in years, I felt free from the constant fear of her next demand, her next insult, her next attempt to take something from me. I was no longer living in the shadow of her expectations, no longer shrinking to fit the role she had written for me. I had chosen myself, and even if it meant losing her, I knew I couldn't go back. The days that followed were some of the loneliest of my life. Lauren stopped calling, stopped visiting, stopped pretending to care. Word spread quickly through the family, and soon the phone calls from relatives began, some angry, some confused, some simply curious. How could you do this to your own daughter? Are you sure you're thinking clearly? Maybe you should reconsider before it's too late. Each call was a fresh wound, a reminder that I was now truly alone. I found myself questioning everything, my judgment, my sanity, my worth as a mother. I wandered the house, touching the things that once brought me comfort, now heavy with memories. I missed Lauren, missed the sound of her laughter, the feel of her hand in mine, the hope that one day we would find our way back to each other. But I also knew that hope had become a chain, binding me to a life of pain and disappointment. There were moments when I almost picked up the phone, almost begged her to forgive me, to come home, to let us start over. But each time, I remembered the look in her eyes, the sound of her voice, the certainty that nothing I did would ever be enough. I realized that I had spent too long trying to fill a void that could never be filled, trying to earn a love that should have been given freely. In the quiet of those lonely days, I began to grieve, not just for Lauren, but for the life I had imagined, the family I had tried so hard to build. I grieved for the mother I had been, the woman I had lost, the years I could never get back. But I also began to heal. I found comfort in small things, a walk in the park, a kind word from Grace, the warmth of the sun on my face. I realized that I was still here, still breathing, still capable of finding joy. The consequences of my decision were real and painful, but so was the freedom that came with it. I had chosen to honor myself, to value my own worth, to leave a legacy of kindness rather than bitterness. And as the days passed, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, I had done the right thing after all. In the weeks that followed Lauren's outburst, I found myself moving through life in a strange, quiet haze. The house felt emptier than ever, but the air was lighter, as if a storm had finally passed. I spent long mornings sitting by the window, watching the world outside, letting the silence settle around me like a soft blanket. There were moments when the ache of loss threatened to swallow me whole, but I refused to let it. I had made my choice, and now I had to live with it. Grace became my anchor. She called every day, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to invite me for tea or a walk in the park. She never pushed, never pried, but her presence was a steady comfort. One afternoon, she brought over a homemade pie and a stack of old photographs. We sat at my kitchen table, sharing stories and laughter, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight in my chest begin to lift. It was Grace who suggested I join the community support group. "You'd be surprised how many women have been through something like this," she said gently. "You don't have to carry it alone." I was hesitant at first, afraid of judgment, afraid of opening old wounds. But the first meeting changed everything. The room was filled with women of all ages, each with her own story of heartbreak and resilience. Some had lost children, others had been betrayed by spouses or friends. But in every face, I saw a reflection of my own pain and my own strength. We shared our stories, our fears, our hopes for the future. There were tears, of course, but there was also laughter and a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. I realized that I wasn't alone, that my grief was not unique, that there was a community of women who understood exactly what I was going through. Their support gave me the courage to stand firm in my decision, to believe that I had done the right thing, even if it hurt. As the days passed, I began to rebuild my life, one small step at a time. I started volunteering at the community center, helping other women navigate the challenges of aging, loss, and family conflict. I found purpose in their stories, strength in their resilience. I realized that my worth was not defined by my daughter's approval, but by the kindness I offered to others and the love I allowed myself to receive. The fallout from my decision was not easy. Lauren's anger had spread through the family like wildfire, and there were whispers, accusations, and cold shoulders from relatives who didn't understand. Some called me selfish, others questioned my sanity. But I stood my ground. I explained my reasons calmly, refusing to be drawn into arguments or guilt trips. I did what I had to do, I told them. I chose to honor myself, to protect what I've built, and to leave a legacy of kindness. There were moments when I doubted myself, when the loneliness crept in, and the old guilt threatened to return. But each time, I reached out to Grace, to the women in my support group, to the friends who had stood by me. Their encouragement reminded me that I was not alone, that I was stronger than I realized, that I had the right to choose my own path. I began to see Lauren's absence not as a loss, but as a space for something new to grow. I filled my days with things that brought me joy: gardening, painting, long walks in the sunshine. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and allowed myself to dream again. I realized that my life was not over, that there was still so much to look forward to, as I prepared for the inevitable confrontations with Lauren, with the family, with the community. I felt a sense of calm settle over me. I was no longer afraid of their judgment, no longer willing to sacrifice my happiness for the sake of appearances. I had found my voice, and I was ready to use it. I wrote Lauren a letter, not to apologize, but to explain. I told her that I loved her, that I always would, but that I could no longer allow her to treat me as less than I was. I told her that my decision was not about revenge, but about self-respect, about choosing to leave a legacy of kindness rather than bitterness. I told her that the door would always be open if she chose to return with love and respect in her heart. With each word, I felt the burden lift a little more. I was no longer defined by my daughter's anger, no longer trapped by her expectations. I was free to be myself, to live my life on my own terms, to find happiness in the simple joys of each day. As I sealed the letter and placed it on the table, I knew that I was ready. Ready to face whatever came next, ready to stand firm in my truth, ready to embrace the life I had fought so hard to reclaim. The day of reckoning arrived with a chill in the air, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you shiver even in the sunlight. I had known it was coming. Lauren was never one to let go of a grudge, especially when money was involved. The summons came in the form of a letter from her lawyer, demanding a meeting to discuss the matter of the estate. I read it twice, my hands steady, my heart surprisingly calm. I had spent so long dreading this moment, but now that it was here, I felt only a quiet resolve. Grace insisted on coming with me. "You shouldn't have to face this alone," she said, her voice gentle but firm. We arrived at the lawyer's office together, the waiting room filled with the low hum of voices and the scent of stale coffee. Lauren was already there, dressed in sharp lines and cold colors, her face set in a mask of righteous indignation. She barely glanced at me as I entered, her eyes flicking instead to Grace, sizing her up with a look that was equal parts curiosity and contempt. The lawyer ushered us into a conference room, the table polished to a mirror shine. Papers were stacked neatly at one end, and a pitcher of water sat untouched in the center. Lauren's lawyer began with pleasantries, but Lauren cut him off, her voice slicing through the room. "Let's not waste time. I want to know why my mother has decided to give everything to a complete stranger. I want to know what kind of manipulation has been going on here." I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "No one manipulated me, Lauren. This was my decision. I chose to leave my estate to someone who has shown me kindness and respect, qualities I wish I could say I received from my own daughter." Her face flushed with anger. "You're not thinking clearly. You're old, you're vulnerable, and she jabbed a finger at Grace, "took advantage of you. This isn't fair. I'm your daughter. I deserve that inheritance." "I've earned it," Grace spoke then, her voice calm and unwavering. "I never asked for anything from your mother. I was simply her friend when she needed one. If you had been there for her, maybe things would be different. Lauren's eyes narrowed. You don't know anything about our family. You don't know what I've been through. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years settle on my shoulders. Lauren, I know exactly what you've been through. I was there for every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every triumph and failure. I gave you everything I had, and I would have given you more if you had only asked with love instead of entitlement. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as an obstacle. You tried to take from me what I wasn't ready to give, and when I refused, you tried to break me. The lawyer cleared his throat, shuffling papers. Mrs. Carter is of sound mind. She has every right to decide what happens to her estate. Unless you have evidence of coercion or fraud, there is nothing more to discuss. Lauren's voice trembled with rage. You're making a mistake. You're going to regret this. When she's gone, you'll see what you've done. Grace reached over and squeezed my hand. She's not alone, Lauren. She has people who care about her. Maybe it's time you thought about why you're not one of them. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the child I had raised, but a woman consumed by bitterness and greed. My heart ached for what we had lost, but I knew I couldn't save her from herself. Lauren stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This isn't over, she spat, her eyes blazing. You'll regret this, both of you. She stormed out, the door slamming behind her, leaving a trail of anger in her wake. The lawyer gathered the papers, his expression sympathetic. You did the right thing, Mrs. Carter. It's never easy, but sometimes it's necessary. Grace and I sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what had just happened settling over us. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief, grief for the daughter I had lost, and pride in the woman I had become. I had stood my ground, spoken my truth, and refused to be bullied into submission. As we left the office, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the street. Grace slipped her arm through mine, and we walked together in companionable silence. I knew there would be more battles ahead, angry phone calls, gossip among relatives, perhaps even legal challenges. But I also knew that I was no longer afraid. Word spread quickly through the community. Some people whispered behind my back, others offered quiet support. A few old friends reached out, sharing their own stories of family betrayal and hard-won independence. I realized that my story was not unique, that there were countless women who had faced similar choices, who had found the courage to put themselves first. Lauren tried to rally support, painting herself as the victim, but the truth had a way of shining through. The more she raged, the more people saw the entitlement and cruelty that had driven me to my decision. In the end, she was left with little more than her anger, while I was surrounded by a new family, one built on kindness, respect, and genuine connection. The confrontation had been painful, but it was also liberating. I had faced my greatest fear and survived. I had chosen dignity over submission, self-respect over guilt. And as I walked forward into the light, I knew that I had finally reclaimed my life. The final showdown was not just about money or property, it was about love, boundaries, and the right to choose my own happiness. I had given Lauren every chance to change, every opportunity to come back to me with an open heart. But in the end, I had to choose myself, and for the first time in a long time, I was proud of that choice. In the days after the confrontation, the world felt strangely quiet, as if the storm that had raged for so long had finally passed. I moved through my home with a new sense of ownership, no longer tiptoeing around Lauren's moods or dreading the next demand. The silence was different now, not empty, but peaceful, filled with the gentle hum of my own thoughts and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Lauren's absence was a wound, but it was also a relief. She tried at first to rally the family to her side, calling relatives and spinning stories of betrayal and injustice. Some believed her, at least for a while. I received a few angry phone calls, some cold stares at the grocery store, and more than one letter urging me to do the right thing and remember who your real family is. But as the days turned into weeks, the outrage faded. People moved on, and the truth, quiet, steady, and undeniable, remained. Lauren's life began to unravel. Without the promise of an inheritance to fall back on, she was forced to confront the reality she had tried so hard to avoid. The friends who had flocked to her when she was flush with expectation drifted away. The job she had always complained about became her only lifeline. I heard through the grapevine that she struggled to pay her bills, that she moved into a smaller apartment, that she was angry and alone. It hurt to know she was suffering, but I also knew that I could not save her from the consequences of her own choices. I had tried, for years, to shield her from pain, but in the end, I realized that sometimes the only way to help someone is to let them face the truth. For me, the healing came slowly. There were days when the grief was sharp, when I missed the daughter I once knew, when I longed for a reconciliation that seemed further away than ever. But there were also days of lightness, of laughter, of rediscovered joy. Grace became more than a friend. She became family. She brought warmth and kindness into my life, reminding me that love could be simple and generous, not transactional or conditional. One afternoon, as we sat together in the garden, Grace took my hand and squeezed it gently. "You gave me more than you know," she said, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Not just your trust, but your friendship, your wisdom, your courage. I hope you know how much that means to me." Her words filled me with a quiet pride, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I realized that the fortune I had given her was not just money or property. It was a legacy of hope, a testament to the power of kindness and the importance of choosing your own family. I reflected on the lessons I had learned, the cost of betrayal, the strength it takes to set boundaries, the courage required to put yourself first. I thought about all the women I had met in the support group, each with her own story of heartbreak and healing. I realized that my journey was not unique, that there were countless others who had faced similar choices, who had found the strength to walk away from toxic relationships and build new lives from the ashes. The cost of betrayal is high. It shatters illusions, breaks hearts, and leaves scars that may never fully heal. But it also reveals truths we might never have seen otherwise. It forces us to confront our own strength, to redefine who we are and what we deserve. I am not the same woman I was before all this began. I am wiser, braver, and more determined to live on my own terms. As I tended my garden, painted in the afternoons, and shared meals with Grace and new friends, I found a sense of peace I had never known. I learned to forgive myself for the mistakes I had made, to let go of the guilt and regret that had weighed me down for so long. I learned that healing is not a destination, but a journey, a series of small steps, each one bringing me closer to the life I was meant to live. And as the seasons changed, I found myself looking forward, not back. I knew there would always be a part of me that missed Lauren, that mourned the relationship we had lost. But I also knew that I had done the right thing, that I had chosen love over fear, hope over despair, and dignity over submission. In the end, I realized that the greatest gift I could give myself, and the world, was the courage to start again. With each passing week, I felt the old version of myself slipping away, replaced by someone stronger, more certain, and, most surprisingly, more joyful than I'd ever imagined possible. The pain of Lauren's betrayal was still there, a scar that would never fully fade, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it became a quiet reminder of how far I'd come and how much I was capable of surviving. I began to fill my days with things that brought me genuine happiness. I joined a painting class at the community center, where I met women who, like me, were learning to rediscover themselves after loss. We laughed over our crooked landscapes and clumsy brushstrokes, sharing stories and encouragement as we created something new from blank canvases. I found myself looking forward to those afternoons, the simple pleasure of color and creation, the camaraderie of women who understood what it meant to start over. Grace and I became inseparable. We took long walks in the park, exploring trails I'd never bothered to visit before. We tried new recipes, hosted small dinners for friends, and even planned a weekend trip to the coast, a dream I'd always put off, waiting for the right time. With Grace, every day felt like a new adventure, a chance to savor the present instead of mourning the past. I also poured my energy into volunteering at the community center, helping other women navigate the challenges of aging, loneliness, and family conflict. I listened to their stories, offered advice when I could, and simply sat with them in their pain. In helping others, I found my own wounds slowly healing. I realized that my worth was not tied to my bank account or my daughter's approval, but to the kindness I could offer and the connections I could build. My home, once a place of tension and sorrow, became a sanctuary. I redecorated the living room with soft colors and fresh flowers, opened the windows to let in the sunlight, and filled the shelves with books and art that made me smile. I invited friends over for tea, music, and laughter, filling the rooms with warmth and life. The house no longer felt like a burden or a battleground. It was mine, a reflection of the woman I was becoming. The greatest change, though, was internal. I learned to speak kindly to myself, to forgive my mistakes, and to celebrate my resilience. I stopped apologizing for taking up space, for having needs, for wanting more than just survival. I embraced the freedom that came with setting boundaries, with saying no to what hurt me and yes to what healed me. I realized that I was not useless, as Lauren had once called me, but valuable beyond measure, worthy of love, respect, and happiness. Slowly, a new family formed around me. Grace, of course, was at the center, but there were others too. Women from my painting class, neighbors who had become friends, even a few relatives who reached out with understanding and support. We celebrated birthdays, holidays, and small victories together, creating new traditions and memories. I found that family was not just about blood, but about choice, about the people who showed up, who listened, who loved without condition. There were still moments of sadness, times when I missed Lauren or wondered what might have been. But those moments no longer held me captive. I had learned to let go, to accept what I could not change, and to focus on the abundance that filled my life now. I found peace in the quiet mornings, joy in the laughter of friends, and hope in the knowledge that every day was a chance to begin again. Looking back, I saw that the loss of my old life had made room for something far richer and more meaningful. I had discovered a strength I never knew I possessed, a capacity for love and forgiveness that surprised even me. I had learned that happiness was not something to be earned or inherited, but something to be created, moment by moment, choice by choice. As I stood in my garden one evening, watching the sun set in a blaze of gold and pink, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the pain that had taught me resilience, for the friends who had become family, for the freedom to live on my own terms. I was no longer defined by what I had lost, but by what I had found, a new life, a new purpose, and a self-worth that could never again be taken from me. It was in the gentle embrace of community that I found the deepest healing. The support group at the community center became a lifeline, a circle of women who understood the ache of betrayal and the slow, stubborn work of rebuilding. We met every Thursday evening, gathering in a sunlit room with mismatched chairs and a pot of tea always brewing. There, stories flowed as freely as tears and laughter, each woman's pain met with nods of understanding and words of encouragement. I listened to tales of daughters and sons who had turned cold, of marriages that had crumbled, of friendships lost to jealousy or greed. Each story was unique, yet the thread of resilience ran through them all. We were not victims, but survivors, women who had learned, sometimes the hardest way, that our worth was not defined by the approval or affection of others. As I shared my own journey, I saw the relief in other women's eyes. My story was not an isolated tragedy, but a mirror in which they saw their own struggles reflected. We offered each other advice, comfort, and most importantly, hope. I found myself reaching out to newcomers, guiding them through the first raw weeks of grief, reminding them that they were not alone and that healing was possible. Grace and I organized workshops on financial independence, legal rights, and self-care. We invited speakers, lawyers, counselors, even artists to empower women with knowledge and tools to protect themselves. The room would fill with energy and determination, a sense of purpose that lifted us all. I watched as women who had once arrived with hunched shoulders and downcast eyes began to stand taller, to speak more boldly, to dream again. Outside the group, I became a resource for neighbors and friends, someone people turned to for advice or simply a listening ear. The pain I had endured became a source of strength, a way to help others avoid the same fate. I realized that community is not just a safety net, but a springboard, a place where wounds are tended and new beginnings are born. Through these connections, I discovered that healing is not a solitary journey. It is a tapestry woven from shared stories, mutual support, and the courage to reach out when the world feels cold. In the warmth of community, I found not only my own restoration, but the joy of helping others rise as well. If my story has taught me anything, it's that self-respect is not selfish. It's essential. We spend so much of our lives giving, loving, and sacrificing for others, often forgetting that we too are worthy of care and dignity. Setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but of courage. It is a way of honoring ourselves and teaching others how we deserve to be treated. Sometimes, the hardest lesson is learning to let go of those who cannot or will not respect us, no matter how deeply we love them. Kindness, I've learned, is a gift best given freely, but it should never be mistaken for weakness. True kindness begins with ourselves, with the decision to protect our hearts, to nurture our dreams, and to surround ourselves with people who lift us up rather than tear us down. When we choose to value ourselves, we open the door to new relationships, new opportunities, and a new sense of peace. If you've ever felt invisible, unappreciated, or betrayed by those closest to you, know that you are not alone. There is a community here ready to support you, to listen, and to remind you of your worth. I invite you to share your own story in the comments, your struggles, your victories, your lessons learned. Your words might be the encouragement someone else needs today. If this story resonated with you, please like, comment, and subscribe to Hidden Truth by Grandma. Your support helps me continue sharing real stories of resilience, healing, and hope. And don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss a new episode. Next time, I'll share the story of a woman who found unexpected friendship in the most unlikely place and how it changed her life forever. You won't want to miss it. Remember, you are worthy of love, respect, and happiness. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. Thank you for being part of this journey with me.